with public funding for large investments in agriculture declining over time, and also for irrigation, the potential of public-private partnership to actually give the private sector a more significant role in investment in these goods has increased. So there's a lot of demand for funding, there's not a lot of public funding, so there's a call to supplement the available resources with these public-private partnerships. So clearly the opportunities are there, not only from the finance perspective, but also from the technical skills that the private sector can bring in. Again, for the example of irrigation, could be significant technology transfer in terms of the technologies, in terms of the skills and the knowledge that is needed to actually operate those systems effectively. But there are also many challenges. For example, the profit perspective that the private sector has to have and has is not necessarily shared by the more development type perspective of the governments that might start such a relationship. And most often the farmer perspective, because a farmer, he or her herself invests a lot of resources in the land, and they're most directly affected by any of these public-private partnerships. But the role of farmers and the voice of farmers, and especially women farmers, is often not heard when such public-private partnership deals are signed. The level of capacity, the understanding of even what's involved in such in an agricultural public-private partnership is often missing, even from the private sector. They might not be aware, for example, when they do an investment in land, they might not be aware of the underlying water situation, water rights, long-term water viability. They might not be aware of the existing traditional land tenure systems in the region. They might not be aware of competing claims for the same resources. So while these partnerships, I think, have certainly significant potential, as long as there's not enough public funds, we just have to be very careful when we start to engage in them. And I think really the key message is to bring the farmers directly into the picture from the start. The private sector will generally only get involved when there's a profit to be made. And obviously not all investments lend themselves to the kind of profit that the private sector seeks, or to the internal rates of return. So obviously the private sector will not get involved if they don't see this perspective. But when they do see this perspective, it's just important to take a very long-term view and to sit down and make it very clear, what is the vision that the government has in bringing the private sector in. And the private sector similarly has to be very transparent, very clear what vision, what perspective, what kind of risks and what kind of profits they expect. And the government has to explain what kind of risks they are willing to take on and what risk they expect the private sector to take on. So those discussions, surprisingly, don't seem to take place very often. There's also seemed to be some kind of secrecy around a lot of these deals, even what we sometimes call land grabs. Those contracts that are being signed remain shrouded in secrecy, increasing the risk of them being interpreted wrongly. And as I said, the risk that the farmers, the small farmers that are obviously directly affected by any of these deals, what risks they take on and what can they expect out of such a land deal, that's generally not really explained very well.